Hi, this is Rajiv. I would like to thank you for watching this presentation. In this video, you'll see Beate Porst, who is the Offering Manager for IBM Information Server, talking about what's new in 11.7 from a data integration perspective.
My name is Beate Porst. I am part of the product management team for Information Server. I'm responsible for the data integration side and some of the platform directions around the Information Server. And that's actually also what I'm going to present here is a little bit of an update on what we've done on the data integration side with Information Server and looking what are we doing next with Information Server. Also as you're likely going out to your clients, I included some of the benefits that we typically present to clients that Information Server brings to the table, not just from an integration side, but it is really about the whole Information Server platform story that we bring and that brings the value with Information Server. Good. All right. As I know, we've actually allocated 2 sessions here. One was for Information Server on the benefit side, and one was for the roadmap. I combined these here, and we can make that one continuous session here instead of taking those apart. For that, I included here a disclaimer. You have seen that previously, certainly from other sessions that IBM held. It is just that if we present content that hasn't been publicly announced, it is still in our direction to make changes to those planned items. Now, before going into more on what are we going to do, what have we done, I want to give a little bit on information on what as a corporation IBM is moving towards. And you may have seen that it is front and center in many of IBM's messages from all business units, and that is to help our clients accelerate their journey towards AI, artificial intelligence, obviously. And that is a pretty significant goal here that we have with that. What we really want to drive here is making customers more successful by automating and helping to be more innovative or smarter around the software that we provide. And there is this, what we call the ladder to AI. There are many steps that businesses can take to become more successful. And there are certainly things that we will do from a software point of view to help our clients to be successful. And one of which is the aspects of bringing more machine learning capabilities into our portfolio. And from an Information Server point of view, we have really taken that to heart. And starting with our current releases, which is the 11.7 that you may or may not have heard yet, but we'll see this here in this presentation. We have started to introduce machine learning, and machine learning is significantly, or gives us significantly more edge of making decisions that are not doable if you purely go on a more traditional way of analyzing a discrete problem. In this case, you really do a feedback loop on understanding what has happened in the past and looking at pattern and making and using machine learning algorithms here to find new routes to what a user should do as a next step. So this type of journey here to AI is really part of what we do for Information Server in our software development cycle. Now, another background information that I would like to give you is around how are we organized in our business unit. And we are part of what we call the IBM Analytics Group. And IBM Analytics actually splits up in 3 segments. And it's kind of logically grouped in what are you doing from a software stack perspective. So on one side, there is this what we call collect here. And collect is all about data storage. And when we mean data storage in IBM, it's not so much about the file system here, but more about the database side. And so this is the hybrid data management. You may know this with what we have on the DB2, whether it's on-premise or on the cloud, as well as our warehousing side. The middle group here is around the organization of the data that you've stored previously. And here, this is where information server sits. So the entire unified governance and integration portfolio is part of that middle pillar. And then obviously once you organized your data, you want to analyze it. And here is our portfolio around data science and visualization. So some of the components you may recognize are the SPSS and DSX offerings. So coming back to this kind of organization here, information server being part of the unified governance and integration portfolio or segment here. There are other components that are logically falling into this organization segment, and other things that are part of this segment are replication, master data management, and information lifecycle management. And what important to note here is there is a reason that we organized it in such a way as it kind of logically groups it together and gives us ability to take this to build actually what we call a unified governance and integration platform. And you will see this as part of our roadmap and strategy discussion. All right, so coming back to information server. In Matt's session earlier today, he had basically a very similar slide as this, and we typically use that as an introduction to what information server is. And information server is really a platform that spans across governance, or spans across the capability to help you govern your data, cleanse your data, or bring quality to your data, and integrate data. And the important factor here is really that these are that this is an integrated platform. So whatever you do for governance can be utilized by the integration side, or you can do data quality and integration together, and you have a single metadata repository that covers all of the asset that you need in order to do any of these 3 capabilities. So that's certainly, while we have seen other competitors bringing out platform offerings, I think to this extent that information server provides from a capability span, we're still unique in the market and in terms of the breadth of functionality. And you'll see this if you look at analyst reports that measure or look at our capability, that we are, for most of it, in the leading quadrants or leading sector of the various analyst reports for those capabilities. Now, with the breadth of capabilities comes also a breadth of use cases that you can solve with information server. And there are very traditional use cases around populating a data warehouse, covering regulations, or helping you solve being compliant for regulations, and so on. But we also see new use cases evolve, or having use cases that are evolving from more traditional ones, such as what we call an enterprise data warehouse optimization, or a governed data lake. Those kind of use cases have become more popular in the last 3-4 years as Hadoop or this data lake concept matured. What this means is in a governed data lake, you create this data lake environment, and data lake doesn't necessarily mean Hadoop. It just means a place where you bring data that is accessible by your line of business users. And one thing that you want to make sure is that they have high quality data, but also that you don't violate any regulation or policies in terms of what data a certain user in that data lake is able to see and view and access. And the enterprise data warehouse optimization use case is kind of goes often in support of a governed data lake, as you want to make sure that your high quality, relatively expensive enterprise data warehouse remains in a shape that it is very fast and easy accessible, and that you bring data that is cold or not used every day into an area that is still accessible, but of less or not as high cost and as your traditional enterprise data warehouse. And then we see with Information Server other types of use cases that are more around the master data management side, where you want to bring data into a master data management environment for a 60-degree information-driven insight. Now with what we call democratization of data, we also see a lot of requests for self-service type of access to data and analytics. So, if you look back 10 years on Information Server being now 12 years old, we typically saw the use more in the IT environment. This is certainly still the majority of cases, but we do see a shift where more and more line of business users want to take an active part in accessing and shaping the data on their own and doing analytics on their own, where previously it was very much IT driven. So those kind of things are also being part of what we do and build out for Information Server to make sure that the level of simplification and access is appropriate for users that are non-technical and certainly have a different requirement of how they want to work with a tool than someone who is very technical and works in a certain role on the IT side. This actually is a good segue here into looking into the users of our platform. And and that certainly has shifted in some way. We've always had business users, particularly for our governance offerings, and that remains so as today. But if we look at more on the data quality and integration side, there has certainly been a shift of the consumer being entirely IT driven to a consumer that is coming from the business side, from the whether it's a line of business user, citizen analyst, or whatever name this kind of business user gives themselves. Another user role that we have seen more frequently now is the data scientist, and that really has come to becoming more active in the last couple of years only, and they are kind of in the middle between a business user and an IT user. They are very technical in nature often, but their purpose in life is not to, for instance, integrate data. They want to model data. They want to do predictions of what is going to happen in the future, but for that they have to do very heavy data transformation often as part of their activity, and they want to do that as easy and quickly as possible, but ideally also sometimes in a programmatic fashion. So we see requirements here coming in from that angle as well, of providing a more open environment for them to build it or bring those capability into the programmatic aspect that they work with. We certainly work here for Information Server to expand on who is using our tools and what kind of interfaces we provide to satisfy these different user roles. So when it comes to, if we look at, coming back to more of a data integration view here, we look at different dimensions, what makes Information Server and the data integration side in Information Server unique and best in class here. And you see here these 9 dimensions from productivity, performance, transformation and operation, connectivity, and very important, the build and governance, integrated quality, and the flexibility for deployment and runtime. So I'm not going through all of these here, but I want to touch on a few of them. And the first one I want to touch on is around the productivity. Information Server brings a very rich environment here where you can build almost any logic to do either lightweight or a very heavy transformation, whatever is needed in a specific use case. And the specifics here that make Information Server unique is you build a certain logic independent of how it's going to be scaled out. So whether you run this on a standalone engine or will run this in a grid environment with perhaps 30 or 40 compute nodes, the logic is always the same. And Information Server will take care of it at the time when it runs, what kind of compute environment it has available. The same is true for whether you run a certain workload standalone or, for instance, on an environment such as Hadoop. Many of our competitors have a solution that works standalone. They have another one that runs on a Hadoop, and they may have a third one that runs on the cloud, each of one providing different capability with a different set of things that you can do in each of one, and often not even connected. So here, in case of Information Server, you can really design a logic once and very simply design it in through this drag and drop and combining or linking operations together, and then run it on Hadoop. You can run it on the cloud. You can run it standalone. So this design once, execute anywhere is something that we are focusing on explicitly here, and will continue to do so, of saying, we don't want you to think about where it runs or how it runs, but just how you build it or design it. We've also, I talked about the different type of user roles, and one thing that we are doing in order to transition more to a user that is of a line of business is to provide them with a simpler user interface. So starting with our latest release, we have now an interface available that runs on a browser environment, so no installation anymore. And so we want to really make it simpler to give you access to the data transformation and make it very intuitive to use for any kind of user. Now, coming back to the scalability aspect or performance, one part of Information Server that we are very proud of is the runtime scalability part. And there is hardly any engine in the market that is able to outperform the parallel execution engine that underpins Information Server. We have done performance studies against Spark or other types of runtimes, and it's really so if you throw a massive amount of data at the parallel execution engine, it just is able to do the job faster than any other engine that we have tested it so far against it. If you don't have a need to necessarily run 100 times parallel, or if your data volumes are smaller, you can run in a standalone fashion, or you can really scale out by or start small and scale out as your data volume increase. So whatever deployment you choose here is really based on what kind of data needs you have, and Information Server or the parallel execution engine will utilize whatever resources you give it to them to make optimal use of the given resources. So as you can see here, it uses different forms of parallelism. There is on one side the intra-job parallelism. So think of it as a conveyor belt type of, as data comes in, it is pushed through all the operations here, and we scale it out. The data itself will be scaled out into multiple partitions. There are different algorithms available how data has been partitioned, and then these different conveyor belts are moving forward along to each of these operations. And then obviously you can also scale out by kicking off as many jobs at a time as you want. So we have many of our customers, high-end customers, that kick off hundreds or even thousands of jobs at the same time to get them done simultaneously. One other aspect that makes Information Server unique is, at least in the terms of an enterprise class integration engine, is the connectivity and the specifically the out-of-the-box connectivity. So we, with a few exceptions, we provide all the connectivity that we build out to our users without any additional license requirements. There's also, we also do a lot of work to build out native connectors. So not just saying you can connect to any JDBC or ODBC data sources, you can do this. But where we think we can get a better performance, we will build out native connectors and not just rely on a standard JDBC or ODBC driver. Although we do have this, so if you prefer using those, we even ship a package of ODBC and JDBC driver, but you could use any other driver as well. So you see here a list of connectors, and that also means if you have these connectors that we go and certify each of those. If a new version comes out, we will run our certification tests and ensure that it still functions, or that if we need to do certain things, there are new capabilities brought into data sources, we will look at what we need to do in order to introduce this also on our connectivity side. Another aspect that I want to stress here is the integration that our platform gives to not just do integration at a time and quality at a time, but to do these things together. If you do integrate data, it is important that you look at how is the quality of the data at the same time, not to treat this as a separate activity. That you, for instance, if you need to standardize data, if you need to deduplicate data, that you do that at the same time as when you bring in these data sources and move them to your data lake, to your data warehouse, or whatever your target is. So this integrated capability here of validating the data, ensuring that the quality, that you have a good quality set of data, running it against a set of KPIs that you have defined before you load it to your target to ensure that you do not load garbage into your final data warehouse or a data lake. One thing, you really do not want to treat data quality as an afterthought. Once you load the data into a target and think of, oh, I do this in the next step, this next step may never happen, and then your analyst will use data that may not be appropriate. So here in case of Information Server, you can build workloads that combine these two aspects, and so you don't have to have different teams doing this. All you need to do is perhaps define certain quality KPIs ahead of time that can be then used by your integration team. The other aspect that is very important and makes Information Server stand out is the built-in governance and data protection. So any integration user has the ability to actually understand where data is coming from, has access to all the imported data assets and how it has been classified, for instance, against your business terminology, can look up those business terminology to understand what a data source is all about, and perhaps understand if there are already existing dependencies that need to be taken in consideration. Another aspect here is the ability to actually sensitize data, meaning to protect it. If you move data into a data lake environment, there are certain parts of the data lake that may be so that it is a very open space, and you don't want to make a certain aspect of the data available, but still have it available for analytics. So instead of removing it or encrypting it at all, you may want to apply data masking. The beauty about data masking is that it leaves the data in a state that it can still be analyzed. For instance, it will only protect the part of the credit card, but leaves the country-specific information in place so that you can still segment the data. Or it will create a replacement in case of names or birth date. It will still use valid birth date without exposing the actual information to those users. So those are really differences in terms from removing the data altogether or encrypting it so that it wouldn't be usable for any analytics in a downstream process. And with Information Server, we provide you with these capability, to understand which of your elements in a data asset need to be masked, and then do this while you load and transform the data, and do this in one scoop process. Last but not least here, in terms of the benefits, I want to look at your flexibility for deploying and running Information Server. While Information Server was born as what we call an on-premise software platform, over the time we have actually made Information Server available on the cloud. So you can actually, or we have offerings for Information Server on IBM Cloud. We have Dockerized Information Server, or containerized, I should say. That means you can actually deploy Information Server on any cloud platform. As an example, you could use what we call a bring your own software license, and you bring it onto Amazon machine images, Azure machine images that usually use then container components to quickly deploy those containers onto those images. And the last thing that, or not the last thing, but the next step that we are currently doing is to have information server available on non-IBM cloud environments on those marketplaces. So treat them really as any other services that are available on those cloud platforms, where you can provision them instantaneously and license them in these kind of one bill fashion that you are used to if you, for instance, get a system on EC2 or the AMI environment. So, one other part that I haven't mentioned here is you can obviously also deploy information server on Hadoop. So it's standalone or on Hadoop. So this, and whether Hadoop runs on your own premise or in a cloud environment, that doesn't matter here for that purposes. So you have a lot of flexibility where and how you can run information server or components of information server. Okay, so this as just a little bit on a background of what are the benefits that the platform brings with it. Now, let me do a little bit of an update on what have we done in the last 10 months and a little bit looking back into where were we coming from a release perspective. So back in December last year, we released our latest version of information server. The version number you see here, the 11.7, and the theme for developing this version was around the empowerment of the user. We introduced many user enhancement or usability enhancement for our users, whether they are line of business user or IT users, with a number of new user interfaces that are really geared to specific user roles. If we look back, we are on what we would call the 11 release cycle here. The 11 release cycle started back in 2014. This was our first 11 cycle release, and the theme around that particular release was around what we called the reduction of our platform footprint. So we fully reshaped what we call our services tier at the time. And then going from there, a year later, we released 11.5, and 11.5 was all around utilizing the power of Hadoop. So this was really when the Hadoop platform became mainstream, and we enabled information server to run natively on Hadoop. So natively running on Hadoop means we can have our parallel execution engine being part of the Hadoop stack and taking advantage of the Yarn resource management here, using it in the same way as other services, whether it's Hive or Zookeeper. So from a service point of view, it is treated identical to any Hadoop service that come directly out of the box with the platform. So, but I want to go and the data lake or Hadoop requirements are still very critical for us of what are we doing or what have we done in 11.7. So the improvements of our integration in Hadoop was another critical part of what we have done in 11.7. So I want to actually go and look at some of the release timeline, but more of what were the highlights that we have built into 11.7 and some of the subsequent feature pack that we released since then. So going back to, so in December, we had the general availability of the platform. We also have, for anyone who is already an information server customer and wants to roll up the platform to its latest version, we have an in-place upgrade package available to make it easy for someone without having to do a side-by-side install to roll the platform to its latest version. We've actually gone a long route here to make sure that we are not just upgrading our own software, that we even take or upgrade the base software that we are running on, DB2 and the WebSphere application server, and also do an automatic upgrade on these two components. So pretty significant work that our engineering team did here to help our clients getting to the latest version. Then moving into the middle of the year here, we had our first feature pack, and I'm calling it purposely a feature pack because it was, we moved into what we call a continuous delivery cycle with Information Server 11.7. That means any release that we have and these minor, what we used to call a fix pack, can now actually include features. And so that's why we changed the name to a feature pack. It is both, it has fixes in it, but it has a great deal of new capabilities as well. In the same time frame, we rolled out our first standalone containers here. We actually had already some container as part of our initial base release. So we introduced a new component as part of our governance capability that we call Enterprise Search. This entire Enterprise Search is fully containerized. But we also wanted individual offerings to be available for a containerized deployment so that you can go and say, I want to quickly deploy DataStage, and I really don't want to take hours here. Bang, if you use a container deployment, it takes you 15 minutes and you are done with the deployment. So we've rolled out DataStage and Big Integrate. Big Integrate is the name for our Hadoop offering in June. Yes. Yeah. Sorry, there is a question. Yeah. I'm not sure if I captured all of the questions. It's in the chat. So let me, for everyone on the phone, I will look at the chat for a second. Let me see. If you could help me here finding the chat. Okay, here it is. What about customers who have DB2 and WebSphere pre-installed? Doing an in-place upgrade is complicated then, since 11.5 isn't certified with the new DB2 and WebSphere version that are required for 11.7. So obviously you would, if you go if you do this upgrade, you do obviously do the components as well in one. You are not going to upgrade WebSphere and leave Information Server at 11.5. So I don't consider this a chicken and egg problem. It becomes one if you say, I only want to upgrade WebSphere but do not want to upgrade Information Server. Then yes, this combination does not work. But if you installed WebSphere standalone, not using our installer, then we unfortunately cannot use the in-place upgrade. But if you use our installer to deploy WebSphere, then you can use the in-place upgrade to roll it up to the version that is used by 11.7, which is version 9. In case of DB2, it's similar. If you use the NR installer, we can roll it up. If you installed it outside of it on your own, you would have to roll up DB2 explicitly. In case of it is certainly correct that you would have to do this in one setting, meaning that you have to plan it in some way of making sure you have at least a weekend or so to plan ahead, as these are several large software components that you need to roll up. But I would still not consider this a chicken and egg problem. Okay, so let me continue with the release here. So in our latest update here was in October. So we released our second feature pack for Information Server at the beginning of October, and also released the Enterprise Edition container, Docker container option. So you now have the option to deploy the entire platform, deploy just the containers, and then with these containers are now on the feature pack 2 level. So they are really at the latest stage that you can get. We also have a full installer available for feature pack 2. So if you want to get all the way to feature pack 2 through a new installation, you can do that right away, all the way to feature pack 2 without having to go to 11.7 and then apply these feature packs. Now, let's look at what is part of these feature pack as well as a base release. So some of looking at what we focused on, I already said that the empowerment of the user was one critical aspect, and this is specifically so for the data integration sites. Some of you may have heard that we have started to roll out a new user experience for the data integration user, and we call this the DataStage Flow Designer. I'll show you some, so I get into a little bit of what the DataStage Flow Designer is and what it can do for you today. The other areas that we focused on were strengthening the data lake. Strengthen the data lake means really when Information Server runs natively as part of the Hadoop environment, there were many things that we have taken or done to make it more resilient, increase the speed here, decrease our footprint that we have on the Hadoop environment. With that, we've also looked at ways to how can we run in a hybrid environment. And hybrid means how, for instance, can you run both or have a deployment where you do some of your workload outside of Hadoop and some you do inside Hadoop in one single workload. So I'll go into that a little bit. And other aspects here, I talked about that automation and machine learning is one critical part for overall IBM as a corporation, and so does it for us from an information server point of view. Early in 11.7, when we released the platform, we had some innovative capability that we released as part of our data quality side to automatically determine what new technical assets, so your tables and columns and so would match to the business terminology that you have defined. One thing that is very tedious often for governance users is to do this kind of classification. We wanted to take this tedious work out of them to say we can determine a lot automatically by saying we know what kind of data is in these data sources or in these fields. We know, we probably know some of the name patterns. If we understand that it has a specific data class, we can actually deduce the business terms out of this. And if you tell us through learning, through a learning mechanism, what is a good match, next time we make better recommendations to you. So this was some of the things that we've done in the initially in 11.7 GA. Now, as part of our latest feature pack, we've actually done some pretty smart UI or brought in machine learning as what we call the smart UI to help an integration developer become more faster as they design their workloads by understanding what is a typical operation that coming next. So it's a successor of a previous operation that you've done. You see a lot of patterns of if you for instance do a filter, that the next one is a transformation or some other kind of combination that are very that are done often in combination. And so we do this suggestion, and all you need to do is just click, 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 and finish. So I go into this a little bit as well. And on an ongoing kind of route, we look at what new connectivity do we need to provide to make you successful. So if you look back 2 or 3 years, then our connectivity work was primarily focused to give you more capability on Hadoop. Now, in nowadays, it's we have seen a lot of our customers moving to the cloud, and they want to connect to all these new data sources that are coming on cloud providers, and we want to make sure we have coverage here through our high-speed connectors. All right, so let's look at the DataStage Flow Designer. So as I said, we introduced the DataStage Flow Designer with our latest release. So the DataStage Flow Designer is or will be the single user interface for anything integration related. So so we want to have only one landing place if you need to do any kind of integration work, whether it is high-end, very comprehensive, or very lightweight. All we do is we change certainly the look a little bit depending on what your role is, but it is one landing place. The goal with what we went out to build the DataStage Flow Designer is to not just introduce a new design interface that totally breaks the pattern that we had previously, but to say anything that you have built with our quote-unquote old designer, the thick client environment, is fully compatible with what we do in the new design interface. So this full backwards compatibility is a very important factor here that we set out when we built the new DataStage Flow Designer. What this means is you can either design a job or a workload in the new designer and open it in the old designer, or vice versa. You can open all your jobs that you've built in your projects today and see them and enhance them and compile them in the new design interface. So fully round-trip capable. Now, there are things that we have now built into the DataStage Flow Designer that you will not find on the thick client. We obviously want to transition you off of the thick client. This thin client gives you a much quicker access into anything. You don't need to install anything. Immediately, if you install Information Server site, you have access to this DataStage Flow Designer, so there's no need to install any thick client software. And so new capability we will purposely only build into this new DataStage Flow Designer. And some of the things that are built here to help you getting things quicker done are automatic schema propagation, Git source code control, much more powerful type-ahead search to find assets, and so many more. So I'm not probably not covering everything that we've built into the Flow Designer here, but just some highlights. So we haven't declared the project to bring everything from the SIG client into the new DataStage Flow Designer complete. So we are probably halfway through this process, but there are many things that make it worthwhile for you to actually get started with the DataStage Flow Designer. And one of the things that I already mentioned is the aspect of the machine learning, the smartness of the UI. You will not find this in the SIG client. That's only in the SIG client. And I'm hoping also that the new look and feel, this much cleaner, more modern look, will also draw you more towards the DataStage Flow Designer. So here are some more, here's a look at the Git source code control integration. One of the feedback we've constantly heard from our clients is we want to source code control what we do in a similar way as we do for other software development projects. So we brought this Git source code control directly into the environment that the designer uses and not in a separate environment that is more of a backup restore kind of with our existing information server manager environment. So here you can connect or associate your project with a GitHub environment and then save your work at any point in a branch of your Git repository. And if you are ready with a development, you can then merge it into your master into your master repository to be picked up in the next phase of your continuous engineering pipeline. So this is what is typically done in those kind of pipelines, that you save it into branches and then eventually merge it into the master. And in order to merge it into the master, it needs to have needs to be able to compile and in a runnable state. So we don't want to merge non-workable workloads into a master here. So for that, you have the branches that are done for really the kind of having save points for your workloads. I mentioned the machine learning aspect for the integration a couple of times. And so here are some viewpoints of what we have done for the DataStage Flow Designer to give it this smartness aspect. There is, on one point that is shown here on the right side, what we call the smart stage suggestion. And the smart stage suggestion, if you enable this here on the Flow Designer, is so that at any time, if you are on a specific operation here, it will present you with 5 choices of next operation that you want to do. And the selection for these next stages are so that it looks into what have you done previously. And the more you design, the smarter it becomes. So initially, it will certainly use the stages that are most popular, such as a join and a transformer. And so there certainly stages that are used all the time by users. But if your projects are centered around other type of operations more frequently, the more you use those, the more you will see them at the top of these suggestions. If those suggestions are not what you had in mind, you can go back to the palette and pull a stage that you actually wanted to use. So you don't have to do certain complicated things here. It's really, if none of them matches, you just go to the palette and pull the one, it will be automatically connected. So the idea here is really to help you designing a job really, really quickly. And as we use automatic schema propagation, you really don't have to go back into any of the stage properties unless there is something very specific you want to set. But there's nothing you need to necessarily set from a column perspective if you have a simple move those columns through situation. Another part of where we wanted to use machine learning is this smart clustering. The smart clustering idea is to have a different look at your assets than just by name ordering. So obviously we can order by name and when it was touched the last time or who touched it. And so all these kind of metadata that surrounds a certain work, a job design. But this one really looks at what is in the design itself and said, let me order it by the type of stages that are used in a certain job. And that gives you then some idea of whether or not you have the same job design over and over again. So you can really easily find all the jobs that have the same sort of pattern in it, to group them and maybe reconcile them into a job that is more of a template job using runtime column propagation as an example. So this is more of showing you different aspects of the asset that you have in your projects. And one other part that is not shown here is we also have, and we introduced that earlier, is the smart palette. You see here an option to enable the smart palette. The smart palette is a similar concept as the smart stage suggestion. It gives you an ability to always see the stages that are most frequently used by you or by other users in this project at the top of the palette. So instead of ordering it by alphabetically, it orders it by for you to see all this most frequently used stages. So instead of having your favorites, as in the thick line where you would explicitly move stages into your favorite area, it builds the favorites for you. All right, so some other things are more of what we recently brought into the DataStage Flow Designer. Obviously for us, the DataStage Flow Designer will bring all the capabilities that you today have in the thick line at one point. One of the large enhancements that we have recently taken is to bring the sequences into it. So now, if you are familiar with sequence development on the thick line, you certainly recognize this picture here with all the stages or operations that a sequence allows you to build. You can now build in the thick line, in this new DataStage Flow Designer, and you can see and enhance any existing sequence with that. All right, so much to the user aspects, and I'm hoping you like the new Flow Designer if you haven't seen it so far, with its really nice and clean look. The next look I want to have is around what we have done on the data lake side. There were quite a lot of enhancement that we've taken to really deepen the our capabilities that we have on a data lake. And that's not just from a connectivity point of view. So the one really big achievement that we've done is around the deployment of our engine side onto a Hadoop environment. One thing that we've done is we've fully integrated ourselves into these management frameworks that are typically used. It's either Ambari or Cloudera Manager. And you will see Information Server as in the same way that you see all the other services, whether it's your Zookeepers and your Hive and whatever service you have running, you will see an Information Server service there. And with that, you see all the parameters around the CPU utilization, the memory utilization, the queue status, so on what kind of priority queues are your workloads are running and what's the status, did it fail on a node? And if you want to provision the service onto a new data node, let's suppose you expand your cluster and add a node and quickly want to run, you can do that through this management console as well. So it's a very, very quick way to get your deployment ready on Hadoop. Another significant improvement that we've done is around the preemption support that is available in Hadoop. Hadoop being a shared environment is so that you share your resources, or that resources are shared amongst many services or applications that are taken part on. That means there may be situations where a higher priority application comes in and needs more resources that are currently allocated by a job that is currently running from an information server side. So the resource manager, Jan, may come in and take resources away. That means this job will fail, obviously, or will stop. And so what we have done is we have introduced abilities for you to create checkpoints that are sync points, so that in case this job is going to abort, that you can restart the job from the latest checkpoint instead of starting all the way from the beginning. We've also done a lot of improvements to give you more information of what has happened in such a preemption case. So which container was taken away, and that your operators have more visibility on the type of situation that has happened. I mentioned that we've done work to reduce our footprint. There are a number of things we've taken here. One is we reduce the actual library footprint that is getting deployed. And we are able to utilize the Hadoop shuffle space for our scratch space. So instead of having to set up a separate scratch space on the OS level, you can use what is already defined for Hadoop anyway. So further limiting on what we need on each of these data nodes. And last but not least, I talked about the ability to run both a workload across Hadoop and non-Hadoop. Why would you want to do this? There are many reasons, one of which is you may not want to, for instance, have certain client libraries installed on each of these data nodes, and instead go directly outside to your database to load the data, bring it into the cluster, and then continue doing the operation. And instead of having two separate workloads, one doing the load and one doing the remaining part of the work, we can combine this. You can use and call a DataStage engine that is sitting next to your database, whether it's DB2 or Oracle, bring the data into the cluster and then continue on in one single job that is just managed through the configuration file that you define here, that points to an external engine. So some smart workload optimization here to giving you the biggest bang for the buck in terms of making use of where resources should be running on. Okay, I'm not sure how we do here in terms of the timing here. Here's another look actually at this checkpointing capability. By the way, this is something that can also be used standalone. So this is not necessarily just be confined is the wrong word, but applicable to Hadoop. It's also applicable if you run, for instance, DataStage on its own and said, I do want to have some checkpointing here. This is a very long-running process, and in case something fails, I really don't want to go back all the way to the beginning, but have a landing point before I load my data into the target. Often what happens is if you start loading data into the target, and if data is still coming along this pipeline, you can't automatically restart the job, because the first thing that you have to do is to reset what has been already loaded into the target, right? So we don't know the state of your database or final landing place, so you have to do some cleanup. And if you want to avoid this kind of situation, you can create a checkpoint prior to actually loading it to the target that is kind of your sync point that can be thrown away if needed, but also doesn't require any cleanup, so you can still maintain this auto restart ability. Okay, stepping over this. So I just want to give you a little bit of a view here, what kind of connectivity we have focused on in the last 10 months. So this is a view here of all the connectors and data sources that we have created new connectors or certified or improved. So quite a comprehensive list here. If you look through this, in total, if I look through this, we created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new connectors. 3 here on the cloud side with Snowflake, Azure, and IBM Cloud Object Storage. And on the Hadoop side, 2 connectors with Cassandra and HBase. But there were many things that we brought into some of the existing connectors. So we have one kind of all-purpose connector that we call the file connector. And the file connector really needs to handle a broad range of data types, right? So all the data types that you can imagine that are used on the Hadoop file system environment. And we see there are a number that are predominantly used, which is Parquet, Avro, and ORC. But there are other things too. And one of the things that we added into here are sequence files. But you can obviously also use and connect to other kind of file types, or column delimited simple file types, and so on. We've one other connector that we created prior to 11.7, the Kafka connector, is also something that we see a lot of demand on, and becomes kind of these all-purpose connectivity as you stream data into your data lake environment. And so this is really a connector that we will focus intensively on as we move forward to give you really this kind of streaming integration that you want for your data lake environment. And then many of our users obviously come out of the enterprise side, and the whole enterprise, what I call here the enterprise connectivity, remains critical for their day-to-day operations to ensure that we do certify the latest version of Teradata or the latest version of Oracle, and you name it, right? These data sources are still extremely relevant. So we are not forgetting about them just because some of your new projects are centering around more of the, for instance, cloud data sources. So one of our latest one here was the Cloud Object Store. So each of these cloud vendors, whether it's Amazon or Google or IBM and so on, have their object storage site. And while they kind of use the same kind of from Amazon-driven S3 format, each one does have its own specific. So for that reason, we created dedicated connectors for them. So we didn't want to say there is S3 and S3 is now covering the different cloud vendors. That wouldn't work quite well. So we wanted to make sure we have the dedicated support here. Why are those cloud object storage connectivity, or why is it important? There is a very specific pattern that we see when data is being loaded into a cloud environment. It's not so that you typically directly load into, let's say, DB2 warehouse on cloud. Or so yes, you can do this. There's no question about it. But a typical pattern that we see is to load into object storage, and from object storage load into your final, or some other kind of combination around this. The reason is that object storage is easily expandable. It's relatively cheap to access it too. So it's often used as a landing place, and so it does have a huge importance when interacting between different cloud environments, or on-premise and cloud, or between applications that are running on the same cloud. One last view here, we've covered that a little bit already on the Docker container. So as I said, we have now Docker-based container available for 3 of our offerings. What does it actually mean? So we made those available onto Passport Advantage. So all of our customers that license these kind of offerings have now a choice of either using the traditional deployment or choosing the Docker deployment. So it's not so that these are new offerings in some kind. They are just alternatives that we wanted to give our customers to the way how they deploy the software. And so it's now their choice, or our customer's choice, to say, well, I really want to give it a try, or I do want to have the flexibility that this combination of Docker and Kubernetes gives me. One of the advantages is in such a management environment, you don't necessarily need an HA environment anymore, because if an engine, as an example, failed, you immediately can, or Kubernetes will immediately spin up the next one, so the workload will be available. You obviously still want to make sure you back up your what is stored on disk. That's not going away, but having a failover, for instance, on the sitting around constantly waiting on the services side or so, you don't necessarily need that anymore, because the container can be spin up really in a few seconds, so that you have the environment back up again. So from that point of view, it's much more easy to ensure that your instance is always available and up and running. Another aspect that this kind of containerization gives you is for providing additional resources if you have burst periods. So you could, in Kubernetes, have rules around that you spin up new engines if you need more resources to scale out, which, if you have a traditional installation, would need much more time and to do the same. Obviously, you can add new engines into that, but not in this ad hoc fashion that you can do here with Docker and Kubernetes. So there's a lot of these self-healing and horizontal scaling that this kind of setup allows you to do.